We talked about randomness, and today we're going to talk about the law of large numbers. And that is the most important concept that most CFOs don't understand. You know, a casino owner in Reno once told me something very fascinating. He said, Hindal, on any given night, we might lose money. A high roller gets lucky, the blackjack tables, they run cold. Slots pay out big jackpots. It happens. So I asked him, does that worry you? And he smiled. He said, not at all. Over a million hands of blackjack, let's say, I know exactly what I'm going to make. The math is the math. Short term, anything can happen. Long term, I always win. That's why they say the house always wins. And that is a law of large numbers. That's a law of large numbers simply put in action. And it's not just for casinos. It's one of the most powerful concepts in business and statistics, and one of the most misunderstood. The law of large numbers, it explains why small samples are unreliable and large samples are trustworthy. It's that simple. It explains why insurance companies can predict claims, but individuals cannot predict their own accidents. It explains why your forecast gets better as you have more and more data. I'm Hindal. I've been a CFO in the Valley for over 25 years, and today I want to explain why the law of large numbers is so important, what it is, why it matters, and why every CFO and analyst needs to understand this deeply. So let's get into it. What is the law of large numbers? What does it even mean? The basic concept the fundamental concept of large numbers is very simple. It says this: as you increase the number of observations, the average of those observations get closer and closer to the true underlying average. Makes sense? So let me make that concrete with a simple example. If you flip a coin, the true probability of heads is 50%. But if you flip it 10 times, you might even get 7 heads, and that's 70%, or 3 heads, that's 30%. Within small samples, you can be way off from the true 50%. Now, if you flip it 100 times, you'll probably get somewhere between 45 and 55, closer to 50%. But imagine you flip it 10,000 times, you'll likely be, 49 to 51%. A million times or 10 million times, you'll be closer to 50. You see what's going on? That's a law of large numbers in effect. As the number of flips are increasing, your observed average converges towards the true average. Here's another way to think about it. Random variation doesn't disappear as you get more data. That doesn't happen. It only averages out. Some flips are heads when you'd expect tails, some are tails when you expect heads. And with enough flips, these deviations, they cancel each other out. That's all that is happening in random variation. So the key insight is this: small samples are noisy and unreliable. Large samples are stable and trustworthy. Let me give you a business example. Say your true customer conversion rate is 10%. You send 20 emails and get 4 conversions. That is 20%. Now, you might think, wow, our conversion rate is amazing, but with only 20 observations, you might be seeing noise. You could easily have gotten 1 conversion or 5 conversions just by chance. But now if you send 2,000 emails, you'll probably get somewhere between 180 and 220 conversions, which is very close to the true 10%. You see what's going on? So the law of large numbers is why that happens. More data, more accuracy. That's why you need to keep that in mind. And there's a math behind it, and let me show you or explain to you rather the math behind it. I'm going to keep it very simple. There are actually 2 versions of the law of large numbers. There's a weak version and then there's a strong version. For practical purposes, they say the same thing. The averages, they converge to the true mean as sample size increases. And here's the intuition behind why this works. Random variation has a special property. You know what that is? It tends to be symmetric around the average. Sometimes you're above the average, sometimes below. And if the variation is truly random, these ups and downs are equally likely. Now, when you average many observations, the above average ones and the below average ones, they tend to balance out, cancel each other. And so the more observations you have, the more complete the balancing. You see what's going on? And so mathematically, the standard error, which measures how far your sample average might be from the true average, it decreases as sample size is increasing. Specifically, it decreases with the square root of the sample size. Again, I don't want to get into too much into math, but what does it mean in practice for you? If you quadruple your sample size, you cut your error in half. So going from 25 observations to 100 observations, 4x, it cuts your uncertainty by half. Going from 100 to 400 cuts it again in half. You see what's going on? And this is a practical application. There are diminishing returns to more data. Going from 10 to 100 observations might help, but going from 10,000 to 100,000 helps much less. You're already very close to the true average. So here's a rule of thumb I generally use. After about maybe 1,000 observations, you know you're usually close enough for most business purposes. The gains from more data becomes completely marginal. But below 30 observations, you should be skeptical, because you should be very skeptical of anything that is outside of the average, because randomness is dominating in that area. Now, let me explain why the law of large numbers matters so much for us CFOs and analysts. Reason one is that it explains when you can trust your data. How many customers do you need before you can trust your churn rate? How many deals before you can trust your win rate? How many months before you can trust your average revenue? The law of large numbers, it gives you the answer. The small numbers are unreliable. The large numbers are trustworthy. So know where your data falls in that spectrum, on that spectrum. If you have 15 customers and 2 churn, your observed churn rate is 13%. But with 15 customers, the true rate could easily be 5% or 25%. You don't know that yet. But if you have 500 customers and 65 churn, your observed rate is 13%. Now you can be confident that the true rate is close to that, probably between 10 and 16. So you see, I'm just kind of repeating the examples so to get this through. Same observed percentages, but completely different reliability because of the sample size. Reason 2, it explains why diversification really works. Insurance companies, they insure millions of people. They cannot predict which individuals will file claims, but they can predict total claims very accurately. They are playing the casino game here. The randomness of individual events averages out across a broad portfolio. The same principle applies to your business maybe. One big customer is unpredictable. They might churn or expand dramatically. But if you have 1,000 small customers that are predictable, then the randomness kind of averages out. This is why they often say concentration is very risky and diversification is safe. Why? Because with few observations, you're exposed to randomness. With many, you're protected by the law of large numbers. Reason number 3 is that that law of large numbers explains why forecasts improve with scale. Forecasting a single deal outcome is nearly impossible. Will this specific customer sign? Who knows? There's too much randomness. But forecasting how many deals will close out of 100 in your pipeline? Much easier. The law of large numbers means that the average outcome becomes predictable even when individual outcomes are not. And this is why pipeline forecasting, it works. You're not predicting each deal, you are predicting the average across many deals. There's another reason that kicks into gear, which is it explains why small businesses are more volatile than large ones. A company with 10 customers has huge revenue swings. One customer leaves and the revenue drops 10%. One big order comes in and revenue jumps 15%. You see what's going on? But if you have a company with 10,000 customers, the revenue is very stable. It's very easy to predict. Individual customer behavior, they average out. Revenue becomes very predictable on account of that. So the law of large numbers is literally why scale creates stability. Think of it that way. The gambler's fallacy, getting it wrong. Now let me talk about the most common way people misunderstand the law of large numbers. And it's often called the gambler's fallacy. And here's how it goes. You know a roulette wheel in a casino. It has to come up red 6 times in a row. Okay, red came up 6 times in a row, let's say. So then you think black is due. And the law of large numbers says, yeah, it'll even out eventually. The law of large numbers say that over thousands of spins, the proportion of red and black will approach 50-50. It does not say that the past spins, they affect future spins. Each spin is independent. The wheel does not remember what happened before. The probability of black on the next spin is still 47.4, same as always. The key thing that you need to understand is that the gambler's fallacy and the expected value, we are looking at large bucket of numbers. So if there are 6 reds that come out, there's a good possibility that the 7th red would come out just as much as a black would come out. The future does not connect the past. That's a reality. The law of large numbers works through accumulation of new data, not by compensating for old data. This matters in business as well. Let's say you've had 3 bad quarters in a row. Someone might think, oh no, we're due for a good quarter. But if the underlying business has not changed, you're not due for anything. Bad performance doesn't mean good performance is coming. The law of large numbers is not about short-term balancing. It's about long-term averaging. So please don't confuse the two. It's very dangerous when you do so. Your decision making is going to go wild if you do so, in fact. So the question then often becomes is how large is large? It's a practical question. How many observations do you actually need? The answer depends on a number of things, but there are 2 main things that you need to consider. How much variation is there in your data, and how precise do you need to be? High variation requires more data. If your individual deal sizes range from $1,000 to $1 million, you'll need a lot more deals before the average is stable. If they're all between 45 and 55,000, fewer deals will give you a reliable average. And high precision requires more data. If you need to know your conversion rate within let's say 0.5%, you need a lot more observations. But if knowing it within 5% is good enough, hundreds might suffice. So let me give you some practical benchmarks. For rough estimates, 30 to 50 observations will get you in the ballpark. You'll be within 20 to 30% of the true average probably. For reasonable confidence, you want to get about 100 to 300 observations, and that will give you more of a solid estimate, and you'll likely be within 10 to 15% of truth. And for extremely high confidence, you can look at 500 to 1,000 observations if you have the data, and it'll typically be within the 5% of the true average. For precision work, you probably need 5,000 plus observations that will give you high precision. And this is what you need for things like pricing optimization or fraud detection, where small errors, they matter. But these are rough guidelines, by the way, what I shared with you. The actual math depends on your specific situation. But they just give you kind of like a sense of scale. Make sense? So here's what I want you to take away from this. Don't trust all the small numbers. If someone tells you the close rate is 40% based on 12 deals, that number is almost meaningless. If they tell you based on 500 deals, then you can plan around it. But there are certain things, the law of large numbers, they don't tell you. So let's bring that up. Let's be clear about its limitations. They don't tell you about average, about the fact that average is stabilized. It doesn't tell you that the average is what you want it to be. In other words, if your true conversion rate is 2%, then with enough data, you will converge to 2%. The law does not make it 10% because you want it to be 10%. Also, the law assumes that the underlying process is stable. If the conditions are changing, new competitors, different customer mix, altered product, then the historical average may not predict the future. More data from the old conditions do not help you predict the new conditions. And the law only works for averages, by the way, not for individual events. Remember that. I cannot stress it enough. Even with perfect knowledge of averages, you cannot predict whether this specific customer will churn or that specific deal will close. So the law of large numbers is powerful, no doubt, but it's not magic. It tells you what to expect on average. It doesn't eliminate uncertainty about individuals, and it doesn't tell you whether the average will still stay the same. So here are the key takeaways that I think I can gather from this session that I want to share with you. Number one, the law of large numbers say that as sample size increases, the observed averages converge towards the true averages. Small samples are noisy and unreliable. Large samples are largely stable and trustworthy. And so you know the difference. Number two, don't fall for the gambler's fallacy. The law works through dilution of past randomness by future data, not through correction. Past results don't make opposite results more likely. And number three, how much data you need depends on variation and the precision required. As a rough guide, 30 for rough estimates, 100 to 300 for reasonable confidence, and 500 to 1,000 for high confidence. Below 30, be very skeptical. In a following video, I'm going to show you or actually discuss with you how to actually apply the law of large numbers in your work. Practical techniques for CFOs, for analysts to do robust analysis and reach prudent conclusions and inferences. But for now, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next session. Take care. Bye-bye.